Hi there. Hey, Shalimar, how are you doing? Hey, turtle girl. Yeah, so my hair is wet. My hair is wet, so it's kind of, everywhere. So, I thought I would do another Jodi Arias video while I was waiting on it to dry. I don't use heat on my hair. I don't blow dry it. I let it dry natural, and it's when it's drying, it's so fine and thin. But well, I mean, it's thick, but each individual hair is really thin, so it doesn't want to be controllable. So excuse the hair in my face. I hope you guys are okay. Hey, Tennessee, how are you doing? Yeah, so I hope everybody had a good weekend. It's Sunday, sadly. I wish it wasn't. Hi, Summer Sparrow. How are you doing? Welcome. My hair is not oily. It's wet because I just got out of the shower, and so it's trying to dry. It looks really dark when it's drying. So anyway, um, so I wanted to do a little bit more with the Jodi Arias trial. And there were quite a few of you that sent me communications um, talking about Alyce LaViolette and her, comparing her to the psychologist that was on the stand. Why does it make a difference? There's been a there's been a push for some time for I think there's a misunderstanding about what a psychologist is, like what we do, right? Everybody knows what a counselor is. Everybody knows what a therapist is, but a psychologist is not a therapist. Now we do occasionally, depending on what position we're in, what kind of role we're doing. We may see patients. We may do therapy as one part of what our overall position is. But I think for the most part, unless you're in a hospital setting, now if you're in a hospital setting, you are not only a hospital setting, because more and more psychologists are being hired by primary care doctors, and they're working hand in hand with the medical doctors. So, for example, if you have somebody that comes in for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, then if they're going to get medications, then we would conduct an assessment, make a good diagnosis with objective tests that could withstand the scrutiny of a prosecutor. And the reasoning behind this is because more and more physicians have the scrutiny of their prescribing authorities that are paying close attention to the controlled substance prescriptions that they're writing. And so many of them, before they're willing to write for some of these controlled medications, they want to make damn sure that the condition for which they're prescribing a known controlled substance, that condition actually exists. So we would do an evaluation, make a good diagnosis, and then would probably see that person that's getting the ADHD medication, would probably see that person once every 2 weeks or so to work with some behavioral interventions to also help develop some strategies and new behaviors to help them work around some of their symptoms of ADHD. Another type of condition that a psychologist working in primary care, that they might do would be like to work with someone who is in chronic pain. So if the patient is getting medication or whatever for pain management, then that patient would see a psychologist weekly and again, learn behavioral strategies, learn relaxation tools and skills, because all of those things actually do support the use of medication, and the medication works more effectively. People that let's say that in the hospital, let's say that there's a patient who has, let's say they have an amputation, a new amputation. They have a new amputation and they're going to have to begin physical therapy. Well, in order to begin to walk on a prosthetic, in the beginning, it is very, very painful. And so they do treat the pain, but you can't give them enough medication that they don't feel anything. You've got to use other tools to support their medication. If they get really, really nervous and they're really, really worked up before it's time to go to physical therapy because they're anticipating the discomfort, then what ends up happening is the pain medication that they do get, the body ends up metabolizing the medication very quickly. And then what is really good pain medicine actually gets burned up too quickly, and the pain is not treated adequately. So it becomes very important for people to learn how to control their thoughts, reframe the experience of pain, set some goals that they can focus on, learn relaxation skills and strategies, and learn. A big one is learning how to use effective physiological distraction. So that gives you just kind of it's just a drop in the bucket. There's so much. There's so many. Some psychologists work with dentists, oral surgeons. Again, same kind of thing. They're teaching people to manage the discomfort with going to the dentist. Working for bariatric surgeon, doing psychological evaluations, determining the available coping skills and styles, and then working with behavioral change with a nutritionist to begin to eat healthier food, get the exercise, and then develop some new coping strategies, because once they have their surgery, they're not going to be able to eat anymore, and eating is considered a primary. So there's just so much that we do. We also work in college counseling centers, people that are having an adjustment disorder. We write curriculum. We testify for services or competency to stand trial. I don't know, we do tons of stuff. And like I said, last week sometime, one thing is I'll do an assessment evaluation of somebody. I'll write out a treatment plan, and then I'll give that treatment plan to one of several LPCs that I work with that they're really good at what they do. And then they use the treatment plan that I've done to work with the patient. So there's a lot that is done. Being a therapist or a counselor is one part of the overall psychology experience. Some people are professors. They love to do research. That's all they want to do. They don't want to do anything related to counseling and therapy. So there's a lot of different things. There's people like me that work for NASA on developing working on human subjects issues for long space travel. Right now, NASA has their eyes set on going to Mars, and they're going to use the moon as a kind of like a stopover, refueling, resupply location. And so the trip from the Earth to the moon will be a dramatically different spaceship than what it would take for them to go from the moon to Mars, and then orbiting around Mars for quite a while before they ever go down onto the planet. So there are a lot of psychologists that work for NASA for specifically for things like how do you continue to have a healthy mind when you're living in such a restricted environment. So there's all kinds of things that we do. I always laugh when people immediately go to, oh, I can't believe that's a psychologist, a therapist. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they're not therapists, or maybe they work that they do is working with people who have had heart attacks, and they don't work with people that have personality disorders. But people like to be judgmental, and people like to feel like they know so much when maybe they don't know anything. But so Alyce LaViolette got herself into a lot of trouble. I remember at the time that I was watching Alyce try to testify, and it's so difficult to watch. You're going to find out in a minute why I say that. It was so difficult to watch. You just wanted to run to her rescue. You just wanted to like scream and tell her what she's supposed to say. But in no way was she even remotely prepared to be considered. Frankly, I'm not even sure how she would have been certified as an expert witness, and maybe not. Maybe they got her in as a fact witness, kind of under the radar. I don't know, but anyway, you're going to see that things were dramatically different with her than with the psychologist. But again, psychologist is well trained on doing assessments and evaluations, and how do you get up on the stand and present your findings and defend your position. I mean, before anybody can receive their PhD or PsyD, they have to defend their research. They have to develop a whole research program that nobody's ever conceived of before. Then they have to be in charge of gathering the data, and then they have to be in charge of the analysis, and then finally writing it up and getting it published somewhere. So, and then you have to present it to the faculty, and then they try to make you look stupid, and you have to know how to defend it. So Alyce's training didn't do that. She was trained to be a therapist. And then when she got her master's degree, then she focused on working with people that were victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. And she didn't go any further than that. She had a really, really restricted niche, and in no way was she prepared to face Juan Martinez. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, here we go. I need to share my screen. All right. Where is it? Yeah. Okay. Now, right off the bat here. Okay. I mean, this is right off immediately. She's in trouble. She's in big trouble. Any psychologist would have said, no, don't do that. No. But she doesn't know. If you look up at the top, you see this little chart. It says Continuum of Aggression and Abuse by Alyce LaViolette, right? Let me make sure y'all can see that screen. Yeah. Okay. So, so you see that little thing at the end that says by Alyce LaViolette? I spelled her name wrong. I spelled it with an I. It's a Y. Why is this a problem if you're on the stand? Well, because when you're on the stand, it's all about defending anything that you say or do. All right. Anything that you elect to say or do, you better be able to back it up. What's the best way to back it up? Well, you got to back it up with what the legal profession likes, which is precedent, right? And in the world of psychology, objective testing is tantamount to precedent. Objective testing are tests that have been standardized with a sample. Depending on which test it is, it could be 30, 40, 50,000 people took the same test, did in the analysis for the trend, the statistics is subsumed within this sample of 50,000 people. So it even picks up error rates. I mean, it picks up everything, so that when you use a test that's been normed on a sample of 50,000 people, that you're in pretty good shape when you say, well, using this test, this person, it falls within 1.5 standard deviation, is 1.5 standard deviations above the norm, meaning this person is going to be among the smartest. Well, how can you get away with making a statement like that? Because your deviations are based on a sample of 50,000 people. So that's a good number. If I just sit around and dream up something on my own on how I want to judge somebody's IQ, and then I write by Jules of Thought, and I go in and I test a prisoner and I use my instrument by Jules of Thought, and then I get up on a stand and the defense attorney says, well, how do you know that this person is smarter than 2% or 98% of the population? Oh, because I gave them my instrument that I developed. Oh, okay. So you mean you've normed your instrument. You've gone and you've used it on a wide population, random selection. You've run all the statistics and it's got a really dependable rating. Well, no, I didn't do any statistics on it. I just give it to the people I work with. I know what that test means, but nobody else would know what that means. You're going to get eaten alive. You can't do that. It's just an opinion. It has no backing. There's nothing, there's no solid footing underneath it. So an objective, what the word objective means, if I give somebody a test, an objective test, and then 3-5 years later, another psychologist comes along and gives the same objective IQ test, then that person's IQ is not going to change. IQ is one of the most stable constructs that we have. You pretty much have to do something like go through a PhD program to change the score, or have a head injury, right? Get in a bad accident. If you're just living your normal life, normal aging, IQ remains fairly constant across the lifespan. So I can go up and say, well, I used a WACE, and this is, it's an IQ score of 119. And then the defense or the prosecution or the defense, they're not even gonna question that, because they know what the WACE is. They know what a 119 has merit. It has meaning because it was normed on such a huge swath of the population. So this was right off the bat one of the biggest no-nos. You never, ever, ever take something like this into a courtroom and try to give testimony on it. Never. They can make you look foolish. And they did make her look foolish. All right.
Did any of you see or hear anything about this matter in the media since I last asked you that question? Anything whatsoever? Has anyone attempted to speak with you about this case? I see no responses. Has juror number 5 contacted any of you since she was excused?
Juror number 5 got kicked off the jury.
Please raise your hand. I see no responses. Mr. Martinez, you may continue with cross-examination.
Madam, when we left off on Thursday, we were talking about your approach to an assessment in this kind of case. And one of the things that you told me was that with regard to 558, that was not a roadmap, but it was a guide that you used in your evaluations, correct?
Yes,
Additionally, with regard to your evaluations, sometimes you do interviews, correct?
correct,
And those are called the clinical aspect of the evaluation, correct?
correct.
And in addition, in this case, you did 44 hours of interviews, correct?
Yes, I did.
And additionally, you
That
look
is
at other materials
enormous.
such as written.
I've never heard of that.
documents, correct?
44 hours of
And
assessment.
you review
Never heard of
those,
it.
and then you make your assessment, right?
I do.
One of the things that we were talking about on Thursdays was that even though that is the process that we follow, there's no requirement, if you will, that in this process, that there actually be an interview with anybody, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, you're the one that put together this continuum, right?
Yes, but I'm not sure how you're
Yes or no,
applying it.
ma'am?
No, I don't understand your question,
Judge,
Mr. Martinez. I don't understand what you're asking.
With regard to 558, isn't it true that when we started your testimony in this case, we started talking about 558? Do you remember that?
I used that to define domestic violence. Yes,
Yes
I
or
did.
no?
I defined domestic violence. Yes, I did.
Ma'am, I'm just asking you whether or not this sheet of paper, you see this sheet of paper, 558?
I do indeed.
Whether or not this was used this sheet of paper was used as part of your presentation at the very beginning of direct examination when Ms. Wilmot was questioning you, yes or no?
It was used, yes.
And when you finished your cross-examination or your direct examination on Thursday, isn't it also true that this document was used when you were talking about whether or not the defendant was abused, correct?
On Thursday?
Yes. Do you remember back to Thursday, ma'am?
I do remember
Do you
Thursday.
remember that Ms. Wilmot was asking you questions for most of the day?
Yes, I do.
And for a shorter portion, there was the cross-examination, right?
Yes, there was.
At the very end, do you remember that Ms. Wilmot was using this with regard to your opinion of abuse in this case? Do you remember that?
Yes, she was using it as part.
Yes, so the answer is yes, correct?
Yes, in part.
So you do use it with regard to your assessment in cases where the issue is whether or not there's any abuse, correct?
I don't really use any specific thing. I use that as a guideline, and I don't use it to apply specifically to each case. I use it as a...
Okay, now look at Jodi's face. Jodi sees the writing on the wall. She's watching this and she's thinking, wait a minute, why does this lady sound like she doesn't know what she's talking about? Wilmot has now put her head down and is back furiously writing, whereas previously she was really watching. This is Wilmot's witness. She's the one that got her in on this thing.
template in describing what domestic violence looks like, Mr. Martinez, and a range of domestic violence. That's how I use it. And I use it in training.
And you used it in this case, right?
I did not use it in regard to Ms. Arias. If that's what you're asking me, I'm not
No.
sure.
No, I asked you whether or not you used it in this case in the sense that you walked into this court. Do you remember taking an oath and sitting up there early on the first day of these proceedings?
Yes,
And during the early part of those proceedings, this exhibit, this continuum of aggression and abuse was used, wasn't it?
it was used as an
Yes or no?
explanation. It was used as an
Ma'am, Judge, could
explanation.
you instruct the witness to answer, please?
Ms. LaViolette, can you answer yes or no?
Okay, now, see, this is so important, right? And one of the reasons why I decided to go ahead and show this particular clip is because this, what you're watching, is at the very heart of what I fear and what AK fears is going to happen in the Barry Morphew trial. We believe, well, I'm not going to speak for him. I believe that the prosecution in no way has the skill set and the education, the quality of education that Eaton and Nielson have from Denver, Barry's attorneys. it is my opinion that various attorneys, they're the best of the best. They know what they're doing. And my fear is that the prosecution, Chaffee County is a really little small place. They don't pay as much money as, the bigger cities with the big fancy firms. Those attorneys are, not making much money. And I don't mean money brings quality, but I mean, if you're a really good an attorney, you're going to want to take a position that pays more money, right? It's just human nature. So seeing what we saw in the preliminary, I was very surprised. The defense attorneys dominated. They really did. They dominated. So this is what I fear. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, okay, you're going to go on, and I've I've stopped this at the beginning of her trying to explain what this model is that she's developed of violence and abuse, this continuum, she calls it. She does not even have the vocabulary. She knows why she made it, but she doesn't know what it's called or the usefulness of something like this in the greater field of science or social sciences. What he's asking is, what she needs to try to answer is that this is a model of her theory, her own theory of how how violent situations occur, what the perpetrator, what the abuser do together as a dance, how they end up creating violence. She's developed a theory, and a theory stands until it fails to support its own null. And she hasn't even tested her theory. All she's done is she's just developed a model. She just sat down and drew out 4 boxes and listed, some levels of behaviors, and then she's calling it an assessment tool or an instrument, and it's none of those things. It's not even a theory. Technically, it's a model. She's just developed a model based on her own opinion. She doesn't give any type of empirical research, published research to back her model. She doesn't list any a priori assumptions. She doesn't give anything to say this is where this information came from. So she's so limited in her knowledge, not because she's not good at what she does. She's a good therapist. She's a great therapist. She does great work with domestic violence. But in terms of research and assessment and testing and testifying in a court, she simply just does not know. She doesn't have the knowledge. She doesn't know. She doesn't even know the proper name of what it is that she has brought into the courtroom. And now Juan Martinez is going to rip her to shreds, going to make her look foolish. It's really hard to watch.
It doesn't feel complete, Your Honor, to answer just yes or no.
All right, Mr. Martinez.
All right then, ma'am. Isn't it true that when you first testified, Exhibit 558, and Ms. Wilmot was asking you questions, it was placed underneath this machine here, and it was broadcast for everybody to see it in the courtroom? Yes or no?
That's true.
And at the very end, isn't it true that this guide, this template, whatever it is, isn't it true that that was used during the questioning by Ms. Wilmot at the end of your direct examination in this courtroom? Yes or no?
Yes, it was.
But you're saying you didn't use it for any purpose in this case, right? That's what you're saying then.
I'm not saying that, Mr. Martinez. I'm saying I don't use it as exclusively as a diagnostic tool at all. I use it in training and to look at interventions in particular, but it also gives a more complete, and this is why it was used here, a more complete definition of domestic violence and the range of behaviors, and also looking at aggression that happens in otherwise healthy families that don't have patterns of domestic violence.
Are you done?
Yes, I am.
Did you use it in this case, yes or no?
Objection is to vagueness. Which aspect of the case?
Sustained.
High
Did you use it
calamity.
in this case as part of your presentation to the jury?
Yes, I did.
Did you use it in this case as part of your assessment of the defendant?
Not in particular.
Well, then why were we even talking about this Exhibit 558 if it doesn't even apply to this case then, ma'am?
It does apply to the case.
Well, let me do it this way. If you said you didn't use it with regard to your assessment of the defendant, then what do we even need to look at this if you didn't use it?
I use it to look at the range of domestic violence. So in that way, I looked at it. I'm not someone who just lumps a diagnosis. And as I was very clear about, this is a range, it's a continuum. So I use it in that way. It's a framework that I think about. It's something that I use to look at what's happening in a relationship. So in that way, yes, Mr. Martinez, I used it.
So nothing in this 558 applies in this case. Is that what you're saying?
No, you mischaracterized what I just
No,
said.
I'm asking you yes or no. Are you telling me, yes or no, that nothing in Exhibit 558 applies as part of your assessment in this case?
I think I just answered that question.
Is that
Mr.
yes or no?
Martinez. I said that there is a range of behavior, and I used that to look at this case.
So what is on this document then was used by you in this case as it applied to the defendant, correct?
To a certain degree.
So if we want to talk about the defendant's case and we want to talk about how it is that you reach your assessment, by necessity, we can refer to Exhibit 558, right?
In a limited way, sure.
So that's a yes, correct?
Objection is characterized as your answer.
Overruled.
Is that yes or no?
You can.
And in this case, you also went through a number of answers and to the questions, and you talked about the first column, and you also talked to the column to the end, didn't you?
I talked about all the columns.
Yes,
Yes,
you
yes.
talked about every one of them in this presentation when you testified, correct?
Yes, I did.
Madam, one of the things that we talked about that in the context of whether or not Snow White was a battered woman, right? That's how it started, right?
I think we spent a lot of time talking.
Is that
about
yes or no?
That is, yes, we spent a lot of time talking
Ma'am.
about that.
Did I ask you if we spent a lot of time on it?
I'm just trying to give you a more
Ma'am.
effective answer.
Judge, would you please ask the,
Ms. LaViolette, listen carefully to the question and try to answer the question you are being asked.
Okay,
did we discuss this in connection with whether or not Snow White was a battered woman? Do you remember that?
yes,
And with regard to that, in fact, you spoke about that back in Los Angeles in 2010. That's what your CV shows us, right?
yes,
And in fact, that was a keynote address back in 2010, right?
yes,
And so if you being the keynote speaker there, you discussed issues involving whether or not this applied in connection with Snow White, right?
no, I did not.
So, but you did deliver this keynote speech back in 2010, right?
It had nothing to do with this particular
All right.
continuum.
It had nothing to do with this particular aspect, but it did have to do with whether or not Snow White was a battered woman, right?
I think I said that that was a catchy title,
Right.
and I used the catchy title.
Right, but it was in connection to that catchy title, right? The present, where you were the keynote speaker, right? Man, actually, that's not true, is it?
What's not true?
Isn't it true that you did not deliver the keynote speech back in 2010 involving whether or not Snow White was a battered woman?
Well, you gave me
Yes or
the,
no? Yes or no?
no, I don't know. I don't have my CV with me. So I gave several keynote addresses, and if you are trying to trick me with a year,
Okay, there's another big one, right? If you are on the stand, you better make sure that everything that you say, everything you've turned in to the attorneys, you better make sure it's right, down to the day. If the day that you gave some testimony or you did some kind of speech, if it was May the 14th and you put down May the 4th, they're going to use that to call your credibility into question, right? So your CV is going to serve, or Vita is going to serve as the foundation for your position as expert, for you being able to, with reasonable confidence, to go up and to state your opinion and how you came to your decision that you did, with the right proper instruments and using a proper process, high level of integrity, following your ethics and state law. And they want to prove all of that because the jury is going to believe in you. The jury is going to listen to you, and they're going to use what you say as part of their data to make a decision about someone's life, And I don't just mean in a death penalty. I mean, whether they get 5 years or 50 years, So of any time that you're going to do something, you are not lackadaisical or iffy, wishy-washy when you go up on a stand. When you go up on a stand, an expert witness will never say, I don't know. You better know. You're the expert in the room, right? So there are ways to answer questions that you might otherwise say, I don't know. There's ways to answer them where you qualify what you're saying, but you hear what she says. Okay, well, kind of. Well, in part, sort of. None of those things are inspiring confidence, correct? And now he says, oh, well, you said that, your cute, catchy little title, Snow White was an abused woman, which that's just dumb. Snow White was an abused woman, that you were keynote speaker. She says, yes, it's on her CV. And so he begins to question her, and she says, well, I don't have my CV. Well, you better be careful because Juan has your CV, and his people have gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. They've checked every single date and every location, every conference name, and every author that you put on there. Every one. And so Alyce is about to get another very hard lesson.
you can trick me with a year.
This is the issue you discussed.
I mean,
All right.
if you will allow me to
Ms.
see.
LaViolette, hold on for a moment. Mr. Martinez asked another question.
Ma'am, I want you to take a look at an exhibit, which is part of your CV, okay?
All right.
Please take a look at it and see if this is not page 3 of 34 of your CV. This is exhibit 596. You recognize it?
Hi, Janny. Hi, Yvette. Hey, Roni girl. Hey, Ange.
Yes,
Cinnamon.
And that is a true
I
and accurate
desired. Hey, T,
copy
please.
of that particular page, correct?
yes. Well, it's, yeah, part of it's of that page.
If I may have it back.
So,
I move for the admission of exhibit 596.
Any objection? Mr. Speed objects unless the entire CV comes in.
Approach, please. 596 is admitted.
Yeah, I wondered why she was there, Sammy Sparrow. And she does have a great reputation as a therapist.
Take a look at it.
But this was more than what her background her training
And
had
specifically,
prepared her
At
for.
the top, it does say keynote addresses, correct?
Yes, it does.
At the bottom, it talks about Los Angeles, California, ICAN conference with Snow White, a battered woman, correct?
Correct.
And let me show you a copy of the syllabus of that particular conference. Please take a look at it. Specifically,
We
take a
do,
look at page
Scarlett.
3.
I'm really worried about those two women from Denver.
Yes,
It does reference this article, Was Snow White a Battered Woman, right?
yes,
And it was presented by ICANN, wasn't it?
yes, it was.
And it was presented in Los Angeles, right?
Correct.
And this is the syllabus that went with it, right?
That's not a,
Class schedule.
that's just a schedule. There's no syllabus
Okay,
there.
this was the schedule, okay. I move for the admission of Exhibit 597.
Yes.
Now, isn't it true that Exhibit 597 shows that you were not the keynote speaker, right?
I was in Las Vegas.
I'm not asking about Las Vegas, I'm asking about Los Angeles, ma'am. Isn't it true that you were not the keynote speaker?
It was considered a keynote. There were considered keynote panels, and I was
Judge,
on
would you
one.
instruct the witness to answer, please?
She is answering.
Overruled. You may continue.
I was asked to do, there were keynote breakouts, and I was a keynote breakout speaker. And it wasn't the person who was the plenary, no, but it was considered a keynote breakout.
Ma'am, the keynote speaker actually was somebody by the name of Catherine S. Connell, correct?
Yes,
And you were just part of Studio 3, where people came by to listen to you in the breakout seminars, correct?
it was considered
ma'am.
a keynote breakout, Mr. Martinez. That's why it's listed in keynote.
In your exhibit number 596, does it say keynote breakout addresses?
No, it doesn't.
So this only talks about keynote addresses.
And it should
right?
have, because it's a world of difference
I
between
guess.
keynote
I-
speaker and
I put keynote breakouts.
author in
I
a
didn't-
breakout room.
Ma'am, with regard to keynote, you're the one that put this exhibit together, yes or no?
Yes,
Your CV is something that you control what goes into it, right?
keynote breakouts are
Ma'am,
listed
Judge,
with
she's not answering
keynotes.
again.
Overruled. Continue your response.
Keynote breakouts are listed with keynotes. Because they're listed in the program as keynote breakouts. So that's why I listed as a keynote. I'm not trying to misrepresent myself, Mr. Martinez, if that's what you're implying.
Then
That's
I
not
move-
what I'm doing.
Then I move for the admission of exhibit 597, based on the fact that she said keynote breakouts.
No.
All right, 597 is admitted.
Let's take a look at this. We're looking at page number 2. Well, let's do page number 1. It does talk about ICAN, correct?
Yes,
And if we take a look at it down here, it does say,
Okay, so I see some of you talking. Why is this important? Well, here's the reason why it's so important for the prosecution to impeach this expert, because it is this woman who has given a position, an opinion that Jodi's behavior was normal for an abused person, that her actions are parallel to the actions that known abuse victims do. And I would disagree with that, but anyway, She also even said, she made comments about Travis Alexander, about his behavior. And what is it that the know-it-alls on YouTube are always saying? Ooh, you can't diagnose, you can't diagnose someone online. You can't do that. It says you have to do a clinical interview. Yeah. Online, no one's getting diagnosed. We're having a theoretical discussion. But for Alyce LaViolette, she is actually speaking about Travis and him having an anger problem and him having some personality issues. And she never spoke to him. Never. Not once. So she is, you get her out, you show her as being uncredible in front of the witness, in the jury, then the jury is not going to be inclined to look at Jodi Arias as a victim. It's going to be very difficult for them to, after what she's going to go through here with Juan Martinez, the jury's going to look at Jodi. They're not going to see a victim of domestic violence. And they did not believe that Travis was a bad guy. They didn't believe it. Jodi really hurt. She shot herself in her foot with all of her nonsense. And remember, in my opinion, the nonsense was really typical of a narcissist. Someone who believes that they can control any environment and any person, that they're the smartest person in the room, and all they have to do is say what they want to say. So she's only got herself to blame. But I just don't know why they asked Alyce LaViolette to be a part of this trial, unless they just couldn't find a credible person. I mean, they've got Dr. Samuels. He's got more problems than Alyce LaViolette. They just couldn't find any reputable psychologist that was willing to do what they needed. I'm sure they were all saying, I can do it, but you're not going to like what I say. So.
ICAN, correct?
Correct.
Then this indicates on page 3 that from 9:30 to 11, there was a keynote speaker, right?
Right.
And the person who delivered that keynote address was somebody by the name of Catherine S. Connell, correct?
Correct.
Now, your name's not on there, correct?
Correct.
And then you said, well, I delivered the keynote speech in the plenary sections. That's what you said, right?
No, I didn't. I was the keynote in a breakout session, in a studio session, it's called.
All right. And if we then take a look at the breakout seminars, does it say keynote speaker in the breakout?
No.
It just says that you're the person that's presenting that in this studio number 3, correct?
That's the way it was. You're implying that I think that I'm lying about what I do, and I don't lie about what I do, Mr. Martinez.
Ma'am, I'm not implying. I'm indicating that you're misrepresenting what you indicated here in exhibit number 596.
I was told.
Ma'am, let me finish my question, please.
Sure.
I'm not implying anything. I'm indicating that you misrepresented the fact that you were the keynote speaker with regard to this, was Snow White a battered woman? Because 597 indicates otherwise, doesn't it? And 597 is this one. Yes or no?
Okay, let me. Okay, I saw some comments here. I was asking if Piddlinville would please make some fried catfish tonight. I think he's gonna do it. Okay. It is rough, Snicker. Terrible. You really want to go in and savor. Okay, so yes, Sammy Sparrow's correct that Alyce LaViolette. Now we haven't looked at Dr. Samuels yet. He's more problematic than Alyce. But Alyce is integral to breaking down the defense because she says Jodi has been abused. And it is because of the abuse that she put up with all of Travis's abuse and nonsense. And she got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until she finally just snapped. Even her mother, now, and I'm going to show this too, not tonight, but another day. Her mother gets up and delivers a statement that makes Chris Watts' mom look like Mother of the Year. She's very cold. The statement is quite limited. There's no emotion. And she says, Jodi came into the world kicking and screaming until she met a man, meaning Travis. And she again was kicking and screaming for survival. And now she's kicking and screaming again for her freedom. So even the mother continues this farce about Travis. They did not find anyone anywhere that would come forward and say that Travis Alexander had ever been aggressive, misogynistic, rude, violent. Everything they said was exactly the opposite. He was a great guy. People loved him. He was one of the best motivational speakers in the company. He was the youngest executive director in the company. His future was bright. He was well loved. So he had friends that he had had from elementary. He had new friends that he had made in the church. The guy just went through life collecting friends until he ran across Miss Extreme, toxic, narcissistic, and borderline personality Jodi. Extreme. All right. So it is important. Juan is not just being mean to Alyce. He's not just enjoying this. There's a strategic reason why he has got to impeach all of her testimony. And trust me, a professional lies on their vita, you're out. You're done. You have your integrity and ethics stand. So you better tell the truth. It's one of the reasons why when I decided that I would continue my YouTube channel, it's one of the reasons why I never misrepresented who I am. Never. Because I knew, especially after watching all the craziness on YouTube world, I knew at some point someone would find out who I was or what I did or whatever. So you don't ever want to be a liar. You don't want to ever be, your integrity matters. So, all right, let's let her continue her argument with Mr. Martinez.
Restate your question.
Is the portion of the CD that we're talking about, which is 596, is it accurate when it indicates that in Los Angeles, California, in 2010, you were the keynote speaker involving this, was Snow White a battered woman? Yes or no?
I was the keynote breakout, according to Deanne Tilton, who was the director of ICANN, Mr. Martinez.
I'm not asking about anybody else. I'm just asking whether or not you believe that this says that you were the keynote speaker at a breakout session.
A keynote. It doesn't say that. No, it does not say that on there.
Ma'am, and one of the things that you seem to indicate was that you really don't need to use Exhibit 558 when you're reaching your assessment, right?
It's a frame of mind.
I understand it's a frame of mind. I'm not asking about that anymore. I'm asking about whether or not you told me previously
Alice,
that you really don't need to
it's
use what's
a
in Exhibit
model.
558.
It's
when
a
reaching an
model
assessment
that
in a
you
case such as
use to
this.
guide your thought and problem
I
conceptualization.
think that you misrepresent what I say, Mr. Martinez. I think in a global term, because I have read other people's work and my work, and I think in those terms, but do I put down a piece of paper and assess that way? No, probably not, but it's up here after all these years.
Well, ma'am, what you're indicating is that you do use it, except that it's in your head. Is that what you're saying?
I use it in part.
And it's in your head. Is that what you said? That's what you just said right now, right?
Well, it's in my head and it's on a piece of paper.
And with regard to this particular piece of paper, when, or this continuum, or whatever it is, did you or did you not use it in making the assessment in this case?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled. Did I use it at all? Did I use it because of my head? Because of what's in my head?
Did you use it? That's my question.
I used my way of thinking, which includes that.
And so if we take
Okay. So you see how bad this is, right? She is supposed to be the expert in domestic violence. And she has said, I don't know, kind of, in a sense, in my head. I use it in my head. Now, I ask you, how does anyone support something as porous as a spaghetti strainer, right? Her testimony is like a spaghetti strainer. There are holes in it everywhere. She cannot stand firmly on what she said because she has got holes underneath her feet. So she keeps saying it's in her head, it's in her head, it's in her head. Okay, I understand what it is. I know what she means when she said it's in her head. But here's the difference. So I have a model that I follow when I'm doing assessment. And it just depends on what type of assessment I'm doing. Am I conducting a full neuro assessment because somebody has suspected traumatic brain injury? Am I doing an assessment for academics, for school-related problems? Am I doing an assessment for developmental delays in the case of possible autism? In each of those goals for why I'm doing the assessment, there's a format or an outline, if you will. There's a format on the criterion that I need to meet. I have to be able to make, first of all, you start with the DSM-5. You have to follow your diagnostic criteria. And then my assessment, I'm going to use objective measures, meaning when I use that objective measure and score it, somebody in New Orleans or New York or Des Moines, Iowa, they would get exactly the same thing because it's an objective, standardized, well-normed instrument, right? So for every diagnostic, every area of diagnostic criterion, I'm going to have an objective measure that I'm going to use that's going to support when I say, yes, this person satisfied this diagnostic criteria. I know that because I gave this instrument. And then I can spout off all of the norming information, all the statistical support for that instrument, right? When I write my report up, and these report, you got to understand these reports, especially one for a case like this, it might be 65 pages. I mean, it is a lot of work. I have in my mind, I know what the specific sections are going to be. I have a model for what's going to happen, what's going to be in each one. The only thing I don't ever give raw data, but I do give the statistical, and then I go through and do an explanation of what those scores mean. So this poor lady, she's a good therapist, but she has no idea what he is asking her. She literally doesn't understand what it is that she needs to say.
Take a look at Exhibit 558, it would reflect what's in your head, is what you're telling us, correct?
It would reflect part of what's in my head.
And nowhere in, and you didn't write a report in this case, correct?
No,
You spent 44 hours.
She spent
you
44
reviewed
hours talking to Jodi and
number
did
of
not
written
write a
documents,
report.
But you didn't put anything in writing, correct?
no, I did not.
And in your approach, nowhere
Correct, desired.
are you required, for
Absolutely, yes.
example, to talk to anybody. in
She was
reaching an
excited
assessment,
to
are
be
you?
a part of
You're
a
not restricted
famous
in that
case.
fashion, are you?
I'm not sure. Required by whom?
By your approach. Your approach does not require you to talk to anybody or conduct any interviews in making an assessment as to whether or not there was any abuse, right?
I was limited in what I could look at.
I'm not.
Yeah, Sammy Sparrow. There's some pretty nasty names for people, experts, whether it's physicians or whomever. Some expert witnesses, give them the right money, they'll say what you want them to say. I don't know how they can live with themselves, but it's a well enough known phenomenon that it has some little nicknames, right? So do I think she got paid an enormous amount of money? It cost $3 million to prosecute Jodi Arias. That means that her defense team billed the state for a lot of money. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think when Dr. Samuels gets up on the stand, I think Juan asks him what his daily fee is. Daily fees can run anywhere from $400-600 an hour up to $1,200 an hour. You know, it's highly variable. I will tell you this, that the ethical people that I know, most people do not want to find themselves on a stand in a case like this. Why? Well, look what happened to Alyce and her practice. You don't know what that other attorney has up their sleeve. So when you go in there, you better be well armed to say, well, I can say that because I have this publication and this publication and this group said this and this person said that and this person supports this and that. You better be ready. And she couldn't even support her own words. It's pretty bad. It's pretty hard to watch.
I'm not asking you if you were limited, man. I'm asking you whether or not this approach that we've been talking about, the one that you've told us in the courtroom over these days, isn't it true that that approach does not require you to talk to anybody or interview anybody before you reach your conclusion?
That's not how I work.
I'm not asking you if that's how you work. Well, you say that's not how you work, right? That's what you just said, right?
That's not how I generally work. I generally do interviews.
Well,
But-
with regard to, for example, Shaitanya Lay, do you remember that you gave us an opinion about what you thought about Shaitanya Lay and Mr. Alexander? Do you
Yes,
remember
I
saying
do.
that?
Yes.
You didn't talk to Shaitanya Lay as part of your opinion about what was going on between her and Mr. Alexander, did you?
No, I read what they wrote.
Right. So what I'm saying is you're not required under your approach to talk to anybody before you give us an opinion, right?
Two things, not necessarily my approach, and secondly, what I am given that I am able to review that I find credible.
I'm not asking about that. You're willing to come into court like you did last Thursday in the morning and part of the afternoon and give an opinion about a relationship involving people such as Mr. Alexander and Shaitanya Lay without talking to Shatanya Lay and without talking to Travis Alexander, correct?
I looked at far more than that, Mr. Martinez.
I'm not asking you what you looked at. I'm asking you whether or not you rendered an opinion in this courtroom about Shatanya Lee and Travis Alexander's relationship without talking to either of them. That's all I'm asking.
I did not speak to either of them.
But you did give us an opinion, didn't you?
On,
Whatever you gave us an opinion, you did give us an opinion, didn't you?
I gave an opinion within a context, Mr. Martinez, and I think that's important.
Whether it's looking at context or not looking at context, what you did is you read something and then you said, this is what I believe. That's what you told us, right?
What I believed based on a context, Mr. Martinez.
Right. And that context did not involve talking to either of the parties to that conversation, right?
That's true.
And in fact, though, you were able to tell us review with regard to Shatanya.
I don't know if they were text or IMs. I get them mixed up, but it was written material that involved conversation between Mr. Alexander and Shatanya Lay.
What date?
What date?
Yeah, yes.
There was a range of dates, but
Right.
if you would refresh, I've reviewed thousands of documents, so what can I say the document that you're referring to?
No, you were the one that referred to this opinion on Thursday, weren't you, ma'am?
Judge, objection made. What opinion?
Sustained.
Ma'am, you told us that Shatanya Lay was vulnerable. Didn't you tell us that on Thursday as it involved her relationship with Mr. Alexander? Do you remember telling us that?
Yes,
With regard to that opinion, in terms of their relationship, whatever the relationship may have been between her and Mr. Alexander, when was that she was vulnerable? Give me a date.
Mr. Martinez, there were a range of IMs. And if you're asking me to be a history major, I'm not a history major, but I read thousands of documents. And if you can refresh my recollection, I would be happy to tell you the dates.
But you, as you sit here now, you can't tell us a time period when Ms. Lay was vulnerable in her relationship with Mr. Alexander, correct?
Which part that she was vulnerable?
You're the one that said that she was vulnerable after reading either IMs or text messages, right?
I did.
And so, wouldn't it be important to know the time period when this was happening?
The time period that this was happening was in 2008. Those were the IMs or text messages I read were during the period of time between 2008 and toward the very end of Mr. Alexander's life. Those IMs stopped.
So you're positive that it was an IM message that we were talking
I
about?
told you I don't know a text from an IM. It was a written piece of paper that I looked at,
And in that written piece of paper,
or pieces, I should say.
how many pieces of paper did you look at to form just this particular opinion involving Shatanya Lay?
Mr. Martinez, I look at context. I don't have to remember exactly how many pieces of paper to form an opinion. And I
Well,
think,
Wouldn't it be important to know whether or not it's based on just one text message or it's based on a whole series, if you will, of documents involving these conversations? Wouldn't that be important for you to know?
it's based on more than one text message, I can
It's
tell you.
based on what?
It's based on more than one of, there were several sheets of paper. There were numerous sheets of paper that it was based on.
One of the things that you also testified to was that in these kinds of cases, 90% of the communication is nonverbal, correct?
I did not say that. I said that.
Okay, so she did say that, and that is a often quoted statistic. And she knows she's in trouble because she said, 90% of communication is nonverbal, and yet she just got grilled for rendering an opinion after reading a few text messages where you can't see anybody's nonverbals. So she's already trying to back out of it. You gotta be willing to make your position, take your stand, and then defend it, and she can't, because she just doesn't know why she believes the things she believes. BZ Mama, the reason that I decided to go over this part of the testimony is because this shows how badly wrong things can go in a courtroom when you have a prosecutor and a defense team that are on completely different levels of skill and training. I fear that in the Barry Morphew case, I think that the defense team is going to be Juan Martinez. I think that Linda and the prosecution, that's going to be Nermi and Willette. The defense team, they're not prepared for what those two women from Denver are going to do. They know what they're doing. Their education's impeccable, their experience is off the chart, and the prosecution team has been prosecuting drug cases. That's it. So it's gonna be I think it's gonna be really bad to watch. I really do. But maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. I love it when I'm proven wrong. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we don't end up with another fiasco like what we're watching right now.
That in communication, and this is when people are looking at each other and speaking to each other, that there's a saying that 90% of communication is nonverbal. This is in face-to-face communication. I don't think we have research about what it's like now when people are doing things over the internet and Gmailing and that sort of thing.
You did say that 90% of all communication in the clinical world is nonverbal, correct?
I agree,
answered
BZ.
that.
It's
I
going to be
said-
ugly unless
I
they ask
said-
for help.
In face-to-face communication, that is the understanding. I did not talk about it in regard to written communication.
Didn't you say it's important to me because there is a saying I don't know if it's all of the world, but in the clinical world, that 90% of all communication is nonverbal. That's what you said, right?
I explained how I meant that, Mr. Martinez.
Now, take a look at this exhibit. It's 595. Look at the top. You can read all of it and see whether or not those words came out of your mouth earlier in the proceedings.
I don't doubt that those words.
Ma'am, please take a look at it. Please do that.
Martinez, I think you said it's 595, it's 598.
598, I'm sorry.
It was their expert. I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, within this context, we're talking about Mr.
Ma'am,
Alexander.
Please read it and tell me when you're done, okay?
I-
Are you done?
I've read the entire paragraph.
Yes
and
or
it's.
no? So that is a yes.
That's right,
correct?
Shell.
I
And
just read that paragraph. Is
she's
that-
still doing
If
it,
you want,
believe
read
it
the
or not.
paragraph or read
It's
the whole thing.
crazy.
And when you're done, let me know. All right, may I have it back, please?
Yes.
Isn't it true that in proceedings here in this courtroom, you said, it's important to me because there's a saying I don't know if it's all over the world, but in the clinical world, that 90% of all communication is nonverbal. Did you say that?
That is out of context, Mr. Martinez.
Sir, ma'am, I'm not asking you about context. I'm asking you whether that's yes or no.
She should
Did you
say
it
yes.
or not?
Yes, I
It's
did.
not a yes or no answer.
And then
Mr.
he'll follow
Martinez.
up.
It's
And then
out of
she explains
context,
it.
and it's not representing what I said.
Right now,
Judge,
she
I
just
move for the
looks
admission of Exhibit
defensive and
598. I
unprepared.
understand that I'll have to take the other part out.
Exhibit 598 is admitted as redacted.
And let's take a look at Exhibit 598. The question is asked, why is that important to you, Ms. LaViolette? You see that?
Yes,
And then the answer is, it's important to me because there's a saying in the, I don't know if it's all of the world, but in the clinical world, that 80% of all communication is nonverbal. Did you
I
say that?
agree,
Yes or no?
Diane.
yes, I did.
And then there's a sentence that says, and that's one of the things that we're looking at is the communication apparently by Mr. Alexander, that although he says it's okay for her to date, and then it goes on, right?
Yes, and it is in the context, but
No,
also
I'm just-
personal face-to-face communication between Mr. Alexander and Ms. Arias.
I know that's what you want to tell us, but in terms of Exhibit 598, it does say, I don't know of all the world, but in the clinical world, 90% of all communication is nonverbal. That's what it says, right?
Yes,
And if we are applying that to the conversation involving Shatanya Ray and to Mr. Alexander that you told us about last Thursday, that would mean
Right,
that
Sammy,
you were
I know.
90% wrong. Because there was you weren't able to look at the nonverbal communication, were you?
that's quite an extrapolation, Mr. Martinez.
Is
Oh,
that yes
God.
or no?
That's no.
And in fact, it's important to look at what the people are doing, is what you're saying, the way their bodies are when they're saying things, right?
That's true in a face-to-face. You can't do the same thing when you've got written communication. But if the written
She's not even
communication
aware
is
that it's
consistent
her
over
rendering
time
an
between
opinion
numerous parties,
that is the problem. She's
consistent. I don't know
helping
what else to say,
him with
Mr.
his
Martinez.
argument.
But in communications where there are people talking, for example, in text messages, you would agree that you can't see their faces, right? You don't know what their faces look like, correct?
No,
No, you can? Or no, you can't? You can or can't?
I can't see their faces, no.
You,
I
correct.
mean,
And with regard to what the person may be doing at the time that they're sending this and how they're feeling, you wouldn't
I'm
get the
sorry,
gist of that
Pineapple.
if you're just looking at the written word, correct?
you can get a lot from the written word.
What you're saying is that by just looking at a text message, ma'am, you can tell what an individual many years ago was feeling just by looking at a text message. This is what you're telling us, right?
What I'm telling you is that I'm looking,
She's saying, what I'm telling you is right now, I'm trying to figure out how I can jump up and run through this courtroom and dive out of the nearest window. That's what I'm trying to tell you on.
in many, many text messages, many, many communications. That's what I had to go on. And when that is consistent, I feel like that is a pretty straightforward sort of situation.
Ultimately, what you're saying is that you are a human lie detector, right?
Gosh, I didn't think I was saying that, Mr. Martinez.
Well, you're telling us, for example, that just by looking at a communication with Shatanya Lee and Mr. Alexander, for example, you're saying they're telling each other the truth, right? You're assuming that they're telling each other the truth, right?
And see, there it is right there. That smart aleck remark about being a human lie detector. You never want that to be said to you while you're on the stand. That's why if you know that you're going to court, you use the proper instruments that are objective in nature, that have very good statistical support, and they have an empirical research base to hold it up. That way, when they say, well, how do you know this means that the person did this and that? Well, because I've got a mountain of research and a norming group of 27,000 people that tells me that, right? That way, you don't get accused of being a human lie detector. I mean, this is rough to watch.
Based on many other communications, it's part of a context, Mr. Martinez. I've said that several times, and that's really what I mean, is I look at a context of behaviors. I don't look at an isolated situation. It's always about pattern when you're looking at this.
And when you say context of behaviors with regard to this as an example, Shatanya Lee and Mr. Alexander, what you're talking about is reading, right?
That I'm reading.
Yes,
Yes, I'm reading.
right. You're not observing them any other place other than what is in the printed word, right?
Yes,
And what you're doing is perhaps in your office or wherever is you're looking at this and you're saying, I'm going to pass judgment on what is going on in this particular conversation without talking to anybody that's involved, right?
I think you're mischaracterizing me.
Well, did you talk to Shatanya Lee?
No, but I, excuse me, I looked at, once again, Mr. Martinez, it's context. It's not this one conversation. I think that's important for people to hear, that it's about patterns and it's about context. It's not about one conversation with one person.
The point, ma'am, is this. With regard to what you may interpret as being vulnerable, could be meant as a joke by Ms. Lay, and you wouldn't know it because you're not privy to what was going on at exactly that time that it was going on and couldn't see the faces. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, she stopped communicating with him after he talked about joking about, or whatever, about suicide. Apparently, she took it in a certain way and stopped communicating with him and was upset by it. So yes, part of what I'm looking at is her reaction and the fact that she stopped making communication and he continued.
She stopped communicating with him via text message, correct?
Correct.
You don't know if they called each other on the telephone, do you?
No, I don't.
You don't know what it was that they were saying on the telephone, if they in fact called each other, right?
I know that he
Yes or no?
pressed, I know that he pressed for communication via text and she did not communicate. That's what I know.
That's what you're saying, but you don't know whether or not she relented at some point and called him. You don't know that, right?
No, I don't, Mr. Martinez.
So you're just restricted by the written word as it applies to her, right?
Yes,
And with regard to Reagan, do you remember Reagan?
yes, I did.
And her last name is Housley, right?
Yes, it is.
How many items did you review with regard to her? Or was it just one or two?
No, it was more than one or two. One of them was 18 pages long. There were a number that were long.
And one of the things that you told us with regard to Reagan was that she was also vulnerable, right?
Yes,
And that conversation took place on May 19th of 2008, right?
I would have to see the date. I don't know the date unless you show me the
Well,
communication.
in terms of benchmarking it, you read it pretty closely, didn't you?
It's
I did. I read
14 years
thousands of
old,
things.
Calamity.
And if you'd like to show me that and recollect the date, I'd be happy to look at it.
I'm not asking you whether or not you read
That's-
thousands of
that's
pages.
not
Can we agree
exactly
that you read
accurate.
thousands of pages?
Yes,
All right, we could.
The murder was in 2008. They spent more than 2 years prosecuting. They had 2 sentencing trials. Was she, was it 2013 she was finally sentenced? Right? Is that right? It was the case that never ended. It was maybe one of the longest cases I've ever seen. Let's see when that, 2015. April 13th, 2015, she received natural life. She was found, the murders happened in 2008. She was found guilty in 2013. They had two sentencing trials where they were trying to give her the death penalty, and neither jury would do it, would reach consensus. So then it went to the judge, and Travis's family members requested that she receive natural life, meaning the choice that the judge had was to either give her life with a possibility of parole or life, natural life, which meant no possibility of parole. And so Travis's family asked for no chance of parole, and that's what she got. So Jodi will never have an opportunity to ever be out of prison at all. Now, she did go back to court, was it 2 years ago? Based on Juan Martinez, he got in trouble. It was political, in my opinion, but anyway, it didn't change anything for her.
Can we move on? And I'm asking you with regard to the date. Isn't it true that in this particular email or in instant message, there's a reference, a time reference, isn't there?
Objection, nomination.
Approach.
Ma'am, I'm going to mark an exhibit, and it has a highlighted portion of it.
And I probably need to get my glasses.
Please, Juan. Take a look at exhibit 599 and the highlighted portion as to the date and the time. Just the highlighted portion.
All right.
If I may have it back. Does that refresh your recollection as to the conversation involving Ms.
I have
Housley
Calamity.
and Mr. Alexander, where she was vulnerable?
No, it does not. There were numerous about that same time. There were numerous conversations. So without looking directly at it, I would not be able to say this particular conversation happened on the 19th of May. No, I would not.
Well, you indicated to us, at least when you talked about their relationship, was that in terms of Ms. Housley, one of the things that you told us about her was that she was vulnerable, right?
She was anorexic.
You used the term vulnerable, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you also are now telling us what she said was that she was anorexic, right?
Objection, Judge, no reapproach. Yes, no reapproach.
So you're telling us that in this message that you reviewed, one of the things that Ms. Housley said was that she was anorexic, correct?
I'm not saying on the 19th that she was saying that because I don't know what's in that communication, Mr.
With
Martinez.
regard to Ms. Housley, you just told us that she said that she was anorexic, right?
That she had been anorexic.
Right. That's what you just told us, right?
Yes,
This is part of the information that you used in telling us that she was vulnerable, right?
yes,
Additionally, as part of that, you also indicated to us that there was some issue about photographs where Mr. Alexander was asking for photographs, right?
yes.
He wasn't asking for nudes, was he?
He was asking for close to naked, I believe.
He was asking for what?
There was something about, he was asking for a bikini shot.
Right. He wasn't asking for nudes, was he? That was my question.
With one, he was asking close to naked, and I don't remember if that was Reagan Housley or not.
So you can't, as you sit here, when you say that he was asking for photographs, you can't tell us either way whether or not they were nudes or not, right?
There were definitely bikini.
So you're saying that they were bikini shots then?
Yes,
And that's based on what you read, right?
yes,
And with regard to that conversation, one of the things that came up was that the defendant was Mr. Alexander Stalker, right?
yes,
And with regard to that conversation, the events involving the stalking were discussed, yes or no?
yes. There were a couple of
Yes or no?
events.
Yes or no? They were
Yes.
discussed, weren't they?
Yes,
Previously, when you were asked by Ms. Wilmot about that, you said, I see no evidence whatsoever about stalking. Do you remember saying that?
I still don't.
I understand. So you still don't see that even though they are referenced in that message, right?
I don't see that based on Mr. Travis's behavior toward Ms. Arias. Stalking is a different ballgame, and it's a pattern of behavior, and it's a pattern that usually creates fear in the person that's being stalked. And so I don't see that with Mr. Alexander as he continues to connect with Ms. Arias.
Isn't it true that when you just said.
That is not true.
Isn't it true that Mr.
That is
Alexander?
not true. Plenty of people are stalked and they never know that they're being stalked. And so therefore they don't experience fear. So it's a little unusual that she's equating stalking with feeling fear. Now, if you find out you're being stalked, of course, if you're normal, you'll be fearful. But not, a lot of people don't know that they're being stalked until the cops say, hey, we arrested such and such, outside your house or whatever. So, yeah, that's not true. What she
was
said.
extremely fearful of the defendant based on what was said in that conversation.
I don't get that based on what I'm looking at. Once again, Mr. Martinez, you're asking me to look at something that's isolated as opposed to looking at the context of what we're talking about.
You had no problem telling us, for
I
example,
remember
that
pineapple.
Ms. Housley was anorexic, right?
Well, she said that.
Right. So you believed her, right?
I believed her because she talked about lots of body image
Right.
issues. Yeah.
Right. But you still believed what was being said. You never actually got a photograph of her, did you?
No, I did not.
You never saw any medical records involving her, right?
No, I did not.
You're basing it just on what was said in that message, right?
I'm not sure if it's just one message, but it
But
was
definitely-
based on the communication between
Right.
Mr.
And in terms of the
Sure.
photographs in the bikini, when you said that Mr. Alexander wanted those photographs, his wanting is based on a statement that was made in those messages, right?
Correct.
And so you're believing what Mr. Alexander is saying with regard to his carnal desire.
Based on much information, Mr. Martinez, not based on one communication with one woman.
But you are believing it, aren't you?
I
Yes.
am believing it.
Right. So you're taking what's in this instant message and you're believing, picking and choosing what to believe and what not to believe, right?
No.
Well, in this instant message, isn't it true that Mr. without telling me what is said, isn't it true that Mr. Alexander talks and uses the word stalking as it applies to the defendant?
Yes.
Isn't it true that he talks about certain aspects of that stalking behavior, right?
Yes.
In fact, in that instant message, there's even an indication from both parties that they believe the defendant is listening in or seeing what's going on, right?
No, there's an inference by Mr. Alexander toward Ms. Housley that she is listening in.
And in fact, isn't a message typed in as part of this conversation that's directed towards the defendant?
Yes.
So it's with the indication, at least, that they believe that she's listening in or monitoring that conversation,
The
right?
judge mischaracterizes her testimony.
Overruled. Let me answer.
Right?
I don't believe that. I believe, do you want to know what I believe or do you want me
No,
to?
I'm asking about what is going on there. Whether or not you believe it or not, we'll get to in a minute. Isn't it true that there is a written communication during the time that the two are involved in this instant messaging conversation of a message directed towards the defendant? Yes or no? Without telling us what it is.
Mr. Alexander is saying that to Ms. Housley. That's correct.
But isn't Ms. Housley, as a result of what Mr. Alexander says, also type something to the defendant? Doesn't she do that also?
He asks her to. Yes.
Yes or no? She does type it though, right?
He asked her to and she complies.
Take a look at it. It's Exhibit 600. Have you reviewed it?
Yes,
May I have it back?
sure.
Are there any indications there of the flirtatious aspect of their relationship.
Yes,
So that's included in there in terms of the issue of vulnerability as well as the photographs. And you've chosen to believe those because that's what you presented to us last Thursday, right?
based on context, Mr. Martinez.
Judge,
based
it's a
on-
yes or no question.
Next question.
We understand that it's context-based, but you have chosen to believe
Yes,
that
Nancy.
in this conversation, you have chosen to believe that they are being flirtatious with each other, right?
They're talking about boobs and libido
Ma'am,
and sex.
Judge,
and-
she's just not responding.
Sustained. Listen
Ma'am.
carefully to the question.
Yes,
You've chosen to believe that. You've also chosen to believe that she's anorexic, right?
she states that.
And you've also chosen to believe this thing about the photographs. Well, when you say that she states that, you've chosen to believe it, right? You told us about it just now, right?
There's quite a discussion about it in the email.
So is it yes, you did believe it?
Yes, I did believe it.
And so you've also,
Recovering anorexia.
and you've also chosen to believe this issue involving the photographs, right? That he asked for a photograph, correct?
Yes,
Right? You now know that, right?
I didn't see
Move
that
on,
in this.
move
Okay,
on.
okay.
And yet, when we come to the issue of the stalking, you have chosen not to believe Mr. Alexander when he says that because of the defendant's stalking behavior, he is extremely afraid of her. Chosen not to believe that.
Based on his behavior toward Ms. Arias.
Sure, but you've chosen not to believe it, even though he's written it down.
He's written that he is afraid and he's,
Judge, you indicated that she shouldn't say what's in there, but
Can you answer the question without referring to what is written on the page?
what is, okay. Will you restate the question,
Sure.
Mr. Martinez?
you've chosen not to believe Mr. Alexander in this conversation, which may or may not be towards the middle or the end of May. You've chosen not to believe Mr. Alexander that he was extremely afraid of the defendant because of her stalking behavior.
That's not the only reason I chose to believe it.
But
Not, or to disbelieve it.
But you chose not to disbelieve him, right?
Objection, double negative. Question.
And rephrase.
You chose not to believe him.
I guess you would say that I did choose
No.
not to believe it.
What I
That pretty well says it all right there. She did. This is why she's a terrible witness. She chooses to believe Jodi, what Jodi writes. She chooses to believe the young woman, Reagan, and then the young woman that Travis is texting with. She chooses to believe all these females based on what they're writing. No supporting, nothing to corroborate that what they're saying has any basis in reality at all. And she does not apply that same standard to Travis, choosing to believe what he writes. He says right out, she scares me to death. Jodi is out of control. She's stalking me. She took a knife to my tires. She took a knife to my friend's tires. She burned up the engine in my car. She crawled into my house through my doggy door. She lays in my flower beds in the backyard and watches me make out with other women. He was scared. And there was so much abundant evidence of her behavior, of Jodi's behavior, that when they discovered Travis's body, literally before the police officers get to the house, while a few of his friends are on the phone calling 911 to say, oh my God, we haven't seen our friend in a week and we came over here and we've just found him. and he's dead in his bedroom, and we don't know what to do. That literally, when she is on the phone, literally she says, you have to talk to Jodi. You have to talk to Jodi Arias. They all knew that Jodi did it because of all of the insane stalking and destructive crap that she had done. So Alyce, she just said what they asked her to say. That's it. She really was not prepared to be up there doing what she was supposed to be doing. But again, you got to remember Nurmi, who was the lead attorney, he butted heads with Arias constantly. And in the end, she refused to speak to him, and she demanded that they argue her case the way she said. She would not listen to Nurmi. She would not do anything that he suggested. He tried to tell her that the things that she was saying wouldn't hold up in a court of law, but she had it in her head that she knew more than anybody else, and it was going to be her way or the highway. Much like the serial killer that defended himself, right? Ted Bundy said, "Oh, I'll defend myself. Don't worry. Let me get up and defend myself. I don't need an attorney." And the judge, with good common sense, at least put a judge at the table. I mean, a attorney at the table with him to act as, support. But when people are true narcissists, the things they do are outrageous. I mean, it's enough that normal people, neurotypical people, can look at them and go, wow, that is crazy that Jodi has got 2 life death penalty certified attorneys, Wilmot and Nurmi. She's got 2 death penalty certified attorneys, and she did not finish high school. She has no formal education whatsoever, and she will not listen to them. And that's what this is what you get. You end up with expert witnesses that are not, in fact, expert at all. So, and I also want to be very, very gracious and fair to say that Alyce LaViolette, because I was curious about her when all this happened, so I looked her up, and everything. She had, at the time, she had a very lucrative practice. She did lots of speaking engagements. She did a lot of therapy, but it was all, she had carved out a really, really small niche. She only saw couples with domestic violence. That's it. So, she's good at what she does, but she in no way was she prepared to be on the stand, especially in a death penalty case. Never. So my concern, the reason I wanted to show this is I think it's a good snapshot for what we may end up seeing in the Barry Morphew trial. There is no doubt that Eaton and Nielson are rock stars, and it is no doubt that so far the prosecution has failed dramatically to perform. The new guy that they've got on the case, when they did the last hearing, he looked like he was in like a 9-year-old little boy's bedroom. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I mean, can't you at least like spread you out, a little area of the room where it's just blank wall behind you? It's a mess. The Barry Morphew case is a mess. Now, AK, his channel is AK Rocks. If one of the mods wants to put up a link to his channel, that would be a good thing. If you go, the reason I'm saying to go over to AK's channel is because he's taken a lot of time to look at this bicycle problem. They got a lot of trouble with the bicycle as evidence, right? And now he's using the bicycle to try to help the prosecution in managing their partial match on their DNA that was found on the bicycle. It was found on the seat and it was found on the handlebars. So he made a video about it. So you got to go over there and see that. And then the other thing is the prosecution simply must go into Denver or Phoenix or Houston or New York. They must find them a DNA expert. They must. This isn't optional, and it is going to be expensive, but they cannot prosecute Barry Morphew without getting that damn DNA thrown out. They must. And they can get it thrown out. You want to know how come? Because it's partial matches. It is not a direct hit. It does not identify people. So they've got to get it thrown out, and they can get it thrown out. For one, the DNA that's on the glove box, it's a used car. They bought it from another family. You want to know who they bought it from? They bought it from a guy in Indiana who has links to Liberty German. True. So they bought it from the Indiana family. They could probably get it thrown out just by that, especially if the substance that left the print, if it was oil based, if it was grease, something like that. Why do I say that? Because something like that can be there for an eternity. Never be gone. Sell the car 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. 10 years from now, powder the glove box. There's your print. Unless you use something like Dawn dishwashing and cut through the grease that put the print. So if it's grease based, then it could be there forever. So you can get it thrown out very easily. AK does video and talks about having the DNA that was found on the bicycle thrown out. So they just got to get busy, though. The prosecution just has to. It's just like it's like they're studying for a test or something in high school. It's like they don't really understand what it is they're about to face. And those two girls from Denver, they're coming to play. It's going to be embarrassing for Linda Stanley. She's already been embarrassed horribly. But they better get their S together, or we're going to see another one of these play out. All right. Thank y'all for watching this with me. I appreciate it so much. I hope you are having a wonderful Sunday afternoon. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I hope you will. Feel free to share the video on your social media if you enjoyed it. And I hope you'll give a thumbs up, thumbs down, or leave a comment before you leave. Okay? All right. Y'all have a good evening. Talk to you later. Bye.